Let's talk about plot, maybe. Let's talk about plot. T. Let's talk about plot. Hit. What you might have missed today was talking about plot structure. Okay, this gets complicated because plot structure has a unique history in terms of how we now look at plot structure, especially in the modern day age of telling stories, and how we used to look at plot structure. So the first thing I tend to do, and it's kind of boring, is I take you through the history of plot structure from the Greeks all the way up to the way that we look at things now. I do this not to bore you, although it might, but I mainly do this because I know you're going to encounter it throughout your college career. You're going to have people who swear by the Freytag triangle, or you're going to have people who swear by the hero's journey, or you're going to have even people that swear by this dude who wrote this book called Backwards and Forwards and talks about stasis and intrusion. Depending on who teaches you what, you're going to encounter these. So you might as well know where they came from. So that's most of the lecture on plot. But let's start with a little bit of dramatic structure first, and let's take a few steps back to get a run-up on where it is we're going. So here's just a primer on dramatic structure and the history of plot. Plot, not where you're buried, but where a story is told. That's horrible. That's horrible. I'm editing that out. That's horrible. So, we've covered this. That'd be genre. Hit the pause button whenever you need it, because this thing rolls by pretty quick. I used Mr. Bean to talk about plot structure, but dramatic structure is plot, character, thought, diction, music, and spectacle. And those are the things we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks in order to get you ready to read these plays. But let's talk about character first. Character has a protagonist, an antagonist, super objective, supporting characters, extra, and anti-hero. The thing that I hit on the most is the super objective, a character's chief desire. But grab those other definitions there and make sure that you have them at the ready. Now, the history of plot structure goes a little bit like this. First, there were the Greeks. They had humorous hamartia, opsis, and catharsis, or a purging of emotions. This is made to us through the Poetics by Aristotle, and that's where it comes from. If you ever have to read the Poetics, you're probably in grad school. That's called the Greek model. And then the next one to come along didn't happen until about the 18th century, and that is the Freytag pyramid, or the Freytag triangle. Yes, Gustav Freytag. You probably had him in high school, and your teacher probably painfully tried to explain what an inciting incident was, whatever. In the triangle terms, you really do not need to write these down necessarily for anything in my class, but I will from time to time ask you about an inciting incident or a climax. And yes, that is known as the Freytag triangle, or your English teacher really trying to teach you stuff. But then along comes this dude named David W. Ball, who writes this book called Backwards and Forwards, and he streamlines the whole thing. He basically says, instead of given circumstances, instead of exposition, there's stasis, and then there's an intrusion or an interruption to the stasis, and the entire story is about the fight to change or remain the same. And the Ball method, as it is known, helps simplify things greatly. But then along comes Dan Harmon with his story circle. Yep, the guy who wrote Rick and Morty. And go ahead and draw a circle in your notes and write these points down. It will appeal to your Dungeon and Dragon brain because it's basically a character creation sheet. You, in a zone of comfort, then you need something, then you go and enter an unfamiliar situation, and then at step 4 you search for it and adapt to it, and then with the next part of the circle you find what you want, but 6, of course, you pay a heavy price. You return where you started, and then there's the change or the result of change. And what I really like is that some English teachers are actually taking this much more seriously than the triangle, because it follows a much more modern sense of how we tell stories today, which I think is pretty righteous and pretty cool. Now, don't worry if this is, driving you nuts and you're not quite sure exactly what it is or what it means, because I'll go back to what I said on the very first day of class, probably, which is the way I teach this is talking about given circumstances and super objective, and to always keep in mind that every story has a 3-act structure. Act 1 is the introduction to the given circumstances. Act 2 is the fight, where your inciting incident is, in case you're wondering. And then, of course, Act 3, the resolution, or as I like to call it, the Jerry Springer moment, which basically teaches us, or asks us, what do we learn? And that is the history of plot. Thank you very much. So, one thing I want you to know, especially in terms of how I teach plot, is that the most important thing to know are the given circumstances and a character's super objective. If you know those components, you know exactly what the story is about. You can identify all the ins and outs and all the nooks and crannies and all the motifs and all the reoccurring symbolic images. If you know the given circumstances, who, what, where, when, and why, and you know the super objective, blank wants to blank in order to blank, everything else is easy. I don't have an ending for this, so I'm just going to end it. A dooba 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 dip ba ba boo.